And again, in your English classes, you may or may not have, hopefully many of you have read Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, which is an Edwards sermon from early 1740s. When Whitefield arrives in 39 is when the First Great Awakening really takes off, this religious revival of the 1730s and 40s, okay? The two most important characters, Edwards and Whitefield, fabulous. What were some of the results of the First Great Awakening? What were some of the results of the First Great Awakening? Awkward silence.
New churches.
New churches, right? New churches were more popular. Old churches on the decline. Remember, the big three were on the decline: Quaker, Anglican, and Congregational. And new churches began increasing in membership. Fabulous. What else? What other results?
Harvard was created, right?
Not Harvard, but you're on the right track. Remember, Harvard was created back in the 1630s, right? But what? Rutgers was one. Brown was one. Dartmouth, Princeton, Columbia, all were Second Great Awakening colleges. Harvard was first in the 1630s, William and Mary in the 1690s, Yale at 1701, and then we don't have any other institutions of higher learning until the Second Great Awakening, and then a massive flood of private religious-based schools. Okay? The only non-sectarian school of that time period was the University of Pennsylvania, which was founded by Enlightenment thinkers rather than religion. Right? Ben Franklin, part of the early founding of the University of Pennsylvania. But those other ones were all Dartmouth was a congregational school. Columbia was an Anglican school. Brown was a Baptist school. All right? Princeton was Presbyterian. So you had all of these religious-based colleges booming, right? The role of women changed, right, during the First Great Awakening, where women became more active in the churches. More conversion of Native Americans and African Americans from the First Great Awakening. Okay? Conversion in general is up. The democratization of religion. Religion became more accessible to more Americans, and they had more choices. This First Great Awakening had an incredible impact on the American Revolution. We began challenging our preachers in the First Great Awakening. Therefore, we had this tradition of challenging authority, right? Like the crown, for example. Separation of church and state was an idea that became popular during the First Great Awakening. Everybody good?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think the Second Great Awakening was? A religious revival, all right? This is shampoo theory, rinse and repeat. It's another religious revival. This religious revival will happen in the 1830s, 20s, and 30s, about 80 years or so after the First Great Awakening. Okay? 1820s and 30s is when we're going to see the Second Great Awakening take off. Who is the main character of the Second Great Awakening? Who is the Edwards/Whitefield character of the Second Great Awakening? Who's the most important cat here?
Timothy Dwight.
Well, Dwight's the starter, right? Dwight actually kind of gets the ball rolling way back in the 1790s and into the turn of the century. And that set the stage for what later became a widespread revival, right? So Dwight kind of sows the seeds for the revival, and it really takes off under who? Bryce?
Charles Finney.
Charles Finney. Charles Grandison Finney is going to be... Charles Grandison Finney is to the Second Great Awakening as Edwards and Whitefield are to the First Great Awakening. Okay? So that's really important. All right? So similarly, this big religious revival sweeps the states rather than the colonies, right? A lot of the reason why the First Great Awakening happened is because of the end of the Puritan era and a questioning. The Enlightenment came along and people began to question the Enlightenment challenging religion, so they wanted to be this kind of desire to return to religion. First Great Awakening happens. So then I said that we're kind of rinsing and repeating. The Second Great Awakening has a similar reason for its creation. It is a response to a rational, reasoned thing. It is a response to an Enlightenment thing, but not the Enlightenment itself. The embodiment of the Enlightenment. Some event is the embodiment of the Enlightenment that then will be responded to by religious people. Right? Better making sense? Robert, safety.
The American Revolution.
The American Revolution, period. The American Revolution is an embodiment of the Enlightenment. So in response to the American Revolution is one of the reasons why Timothy Dwight and his followers in the 1790s and early 1800s are trying to begin this religious pushback against the rational thought of the revolution. Right? The revolution wasn't based on Christianity. The revolution was based on Rousseau and Montesquieu and Locke and life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right? All men are created equal. We're endowed by our Creator, capital C, Creator. Right? That's a very deist attitude in the Declaration of Independence. Not some Christian attitude, but a deist attitude. Right? Separation of church and state. First Amendment, freedom of religion. Right? All this rational reason thought of the Enlightenment plays itself out in our American Revolution and our debate over the Constitution. Agreed? It's to that Dwight responds. Okay? But it doesn't really take off yet. Just the ideas of a revival are being sown for a couple decades until the 1820s when it takes off, like wildfire under Finney. Right? So much like wildfire that the area Finney lived in was called the burned over district, right? Set ablaze by the revivals in upstate New York. All right? Here's a major difference between the two revivals. This First Great Awakening is interesting, and it spreads religion, but it doesn't spread religion nearly as far as the Second Great Awakening does. Second Great Awakening is like the First Great Awakening on steroids. It is on fire. All right? What have we talked about recently is the number one advantage of the Second Great Awakening spreading so rapidly that the First Great Awakening doesn't have.
The transportation.
The transportation revolution, right? In world history, you should have learned, or any history class you've taken, that transportation improvements move people, move goods, and ideas, right? The rapid spread of ideas. Go home and homework tonight. You don't really literally have to do this, but if you're that interested, go home and look up on the Google. Look up where the revivals were happening in upstate New York. And I'll bet money that you'll find that the revivals of upstate New York in the burned over district were sweeping along a swath of land around the Erie Canal. You with me? It wasn't like scattered in random places in New York. It's almost like a line across New York horizontally, and then down vertically the Hudson River Valley. That's where most of the revivals were happening, because it was spreading with the river and the canal. And then if you look here, it's roads and railroads and canals that are spreading these ideas all over. And so the Second Great Awakening is going to have a much more widespread impact than the First Great Awakening because of transportation. Does that make sense? Specifically, we need to know the Erie Canal's impact in the burned over district and Finney and all that stuff, right? Any questions? Take a look up here, all right? I smudged a couple of these ideas, but we're going to work a little bit backwards to understand the Great Awakening. So this is why I wanted you to have that blank sheet of paper out somewhere, or if you feel like you can squeeze it in somewhere on your notes. But these are some results of the Second Great Awakening, okay? And what I think you'll notice, right, is that this is a lot of shampoo theory, rinse and repeat from the First Great Awakening, okay? So for example, the Second Great Awakening was characterized by a democratization of religion. Religion became more democratic. Religion became more democratic. And two kind of bullets here for becoming more democratic. One, decline of belief in predestination. The belief in predestination was on the decline, just like in the First Great Awakening, but more rapidly. Why would predestination, its decline, be democratizing? It must mean that predestination is not democratic. Are you with me? Don't be so eager to copy stuff down. Make sure you're with me in your understanding as we move forward. That's going to be helpful. Why is predestination undemocratic? Or why would be the decline of predestination therefore democratized?
Because it doesn't let you choose where you will end up, because it says that it's already chosen for you, and democracy is all about having choosing.
End up where though?
In heaven.
Right, absolutely. Predestination is like, go back to the Puritan way. The saints. They would determine they're going to heaven, everyone else like, I don't know. All right, you with me? God decides early on who gets to be saved and who not. What Finney is preaching is the idea that us, all of us in here, we have a say in our salvation. I don't want to get into a big religious debate on this stuff, but that's what he's kind of saying to us. If you have faith in Jesus Christ and you work hard in your faith, you can go to heaven too. You can go to heaven. All right? That's the idea. That's more democratic than if you share a conversion experience. Yep, you're going to heaven. Everyone else? Uh-oh. All right? You with me? So the decline in predestination means that we have a say in our salvation in a way. Follow? Or choices. That's very democratic. And talk about choices. Choices are up. Now, I find this right here to be analogous to democratization in third parties. I know this sounds weird. But there are new religions popping up all over the place in the Second Great Awakening. So that means that we have more choices of what religion we want to go to. That's democratic. Am I making sense? Think about the First Great Awakening. Old churches were down, new churches were up. And at that time, you know what were the cutting edge new churches that everyone thought, that's weird, was like Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian, you follow? And everyone who was more traditional was sticking on to the Congregational, the Quaker, and the Anglican. Same thing here. There's going to be a new wave of new religions that are challenging the old religions. And now the old religions include Baptist and Methodist and Presbyterian and what have you. Am I making sense? All right? Notice here, Number two, Baptists and Methodists become top Protestant denominations. But there are other new religions that are emerging. Like, give me an example of new kind of perimeter religions, right, that increasingly become mainstream over time, that begin to emerge at this time. All right? You with me? What's it?
Unitarian.
Unitarian, right? Absolutely. Unitarian's a new one. What's the controversial argument of the Unitarian Church? What's their big controversy there, Nate?
Jesus is not divine.
Right, they argue that Jesus is not fully divine. He's somewhere between God and us, right? He's more than human, but less than divine, right? That's why they're called Unitarian, right? They believe in what? One God, right? Where most Christian churches believe in one God, but in three forms, right? Trinity idea. They reject the idea of the Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Ghost kind of stuff. Cool beans? So Unitarian. What else? What's another new one? Eliana, what you got?
Mormonism.
Mormonism, absolutely, right? So Joseph Smith, where was Joseph Smith born and raised? Upstate New York. Where? In the burned over district. He was in the burned over district. All right? And again, I don't know if anyone in here is Mormon. One of my best friends growing up was a Mormon. And then one of my other best friends was in love with this girl who was friends with, and she followed her all the way to BYU, and they converted to Mormonism. And then she dumped him. But anyway, but what's interesting about Joseph Smith is this, is there were a lot of Joseph Smiths, not literally, but there were a lot of, well, there probably are, I mean, Smith's a pretty common name, but there were a lot of people like Joseph Smith in upstate New York in the burned over district, meaning a lot of people who were going around selling a new religious idea. All right? What made Smith interesting is that a lot of people followed. You follow me? So there were a lot of these folks in upstate New York who were talking about new ideas. And Smith got a bunch of followers, but then they began getting persecuted. So they started their journey west. The Mormons are a fascinating story because they're both a Great Awakening story and they're a Manifest Destiny story. Because they'll eventually end up west. They're frontiersmen in Utah. But because they're being persecuted, they're being pushed west, right? Smith himself is martyred in Illinois. And when you get to Illinois, a mob of locals hating the Mormons are going to murder Joseph Smith. And so that he's succeeded by Brigham Young, who will lead them into Utah. Okay, so new religion, Mormons, Unitarian, Shaker, Mother Ann Lee and the Shakers, right? Seventh-day Adventists, right? Which at the time weren't called Seventh-day Adventists. At the time they were called Millerites because they followed William Miller, right? What was Miller's claim to fame? An inaccurate claim to fame, right? Right?
He predicted the end of the world.
Yeah, the end of times was going to happen on like October 21st, 1844, right? Yeah. He actually, in the Enduring Vision, they talk about how he actually predicted earlier in 1842 an end of times. That came and went. He's like, got that one wrong. All right, now it's October 21, 1840, and then it passes and nothing happens. Okay, but that will eventually evolve into Seventh-day Adventists. All right. All three of the religions we just mentioned, other than Quaker or Shakers, but all three of those major religions, Seventh-day Adventist, Mormon, Unitarian, all have churches in Winston-Salem, right, to this very day, out of the Second Great Awakening, okay? Baptist, Methodist become the top Protestant denominations, all right, you with me? Baptist, to this very day in 2013, is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. The number 2 Protestant denomination in the United States to this day is Methodist, still, all right? All out of Second Great Awakening.
What makes them different? If they're both Protestant, what makes them physically different? Just the name?
I'm a Catholic. I have no idea.
I think we need theologically different.
They're okay, but listen, it's a great question. They are different. They're all Protestant, which is clearly different than Catholic, right? All Christian, but anyway. The best way I can describe Baptist is a uniquely American form of Protestantism. It's got some sources in Anabaptist back in England. Methodism is an English form of Protestantism founded by a guy named John Wesley, who then it comes here later on. Like Wesleyan colleges across the country are all Methodist colleges, right? Methodism is a little bit more structured because that's what Methodist is. They have a method to their Protestantism. Baptists are very independent Protestant churches. In fact, they're the most decentralized Christian church, right? The most centralized Christian church is Catholicism. The most decentralized Christian church, i.e. that the local church holds all the power, is the Baptist church. The Methodist Church falls a little bit in between. I'm sure they have other kind of differences, probably on when they do baptism and that kind of stuff are some differences as well. But they are the two largest Protestant denominations, and they will remain that all the way to today. The students have been working on for the last couple of weeks a group project about some antebellum America, so they got into their groups to continue working on that. And then when they were done working on that, we moved back into our next topic, which was the Second Great Awakening and social reform of the early 1800s, early to mid 1800s.
Okay, and what do you think were the benefits of teaching the lesson the way you did?
I think the biggest benefit is sometimes, especially after lunch, in a class like this, an AP class where we've got to cover a lot of content, that it becomes a lot of lecture and Q&A, but the students are stuck in their desks for an hour and a half. And so having them move from listening to me to working in groups back to listen to me maybe kept them a little more attentive. So moving around and doing different activities was probably helpful.